Do you know tweets with hacking bug bounty tips like this one? To me, as somebody who works professionally in this field, I looked at this and thought, this makes absolutely no sense. I mean, if it works, but the explanation authentication bypass using root array is just, what? Well, in this video, I take you down a rabbit hole. What I thought at the start is just bullshit fake bug bounty tips turns out to be actually really interesting. So let me tell you the story behind this tweet and the story of the actual underlying vulnerability. Let's start with the timeline, how this unfolded for me. It all started with this tweet that got quite a few retweets and likes. Authentication bypass using root array. Change the data from this normal JSON login API request with email and password to be like this JSON root. And then inside of root, you have the password and email. And apparently you will find yourself logged in as admin. Makes no sense to me, but I'm nerd sniped. So let's try to find the source of this information. And we get lucky. Eslam, who originally found this issue, asked to be given credit linking the original write-up. Perfect, let's see what it is about. The client performs a login process by sending the credentials, and the trick is to put the credentials inside the root array. And if the backend have an array with this name, it will work? What does that mean? Now I'm even more confused. Maybe the reproduction steps make it clear. In the end, it doesn't matter what you say and write. Show me the proof of concept and I admit you are right. So let's follow his steps. Here is the login request and the response says it is invalid login details. So next he tried some tricks. Change the false to true, delete the status. So he's modifying the response? Be careful with doing stuff like that. I understand why he does that and what it might lead to, but there are better, more reliable ways to test what this is supposed to test, and I think it's dangerous because it can easily lead to false reports. I know what I just said sounds weird, forget it, it's its own rabbit hole, it's a different topic, let's talk about this in another video. Let's focus again on the authentication bypass. Now it's time to play with the request JSON. Change it like we have seen, and now we get the response success. We got logged in. The cookie is set. Okay, this didn't help. After that, I'm still confused. Based on what I know about hacking and having read source code of probably hundreds of websites, it makes no sense to me to test for this. So I decided to write Eslam, the author of the article. I saw your article about the auth bypass. This is so weird. I'm really curious how you found this. Why did you test for this? And he immediately offered to do a live demo. I sent him a Google Meet link and he told me why he tested this weird root JSON. Turns out it was an accident. He explained that he wanted to see if the site supports XML requests, so he used the burp content type converter and converted the request to an XML request. This makes sense because if that works, you can also test for XML related issues like XXE, but the request didn't work. And here now comes the crucial part. He then wanted to change back the request to JSON, use the same extension content type converter convert to JSON, and the extension turned this XML data into this JSON. The converter saw the password and email within a root element, so it created a root object and put the password and email inside. Oh man, the whole time I thought root had a meaning of admin or something, root access, but it was a remnant of the XML request body. Look at my reaction from the call at the moment where he showed me that.
No response, so I tried to use the same extension to convert back to JSON and it added root by default.
Finally, I had the answer to why he tested for this. It was just an accident. After he saw how important that detail was for me, he updated the article to include these steps as well, explaining that he used the extension. Finally, we all have an answer to why he tested for this. I think this is important because the reasoning behind why we test for specific things are as important as the tests themselves. So it turns out this is not some crazy, weird, obscure implementation that he figured out to hack. It was a happy little accident. I can live with that. Actually, I can't. My curiosity obviously just increased. I want to understand why this worked. What is the root cause? And can we actually learn something from this? So pay attention, I think now it gets interesting. After the call I had with Eslam, he also spent a bit more time and added to the article a theory of what might have happened in the backend. Maybe the target uses a custom framework and also a custom function that deals with the login process. He also wrote up a bit of example logic with a custom login validation, how it could look like. This of course is just a theory, a coding theory, but I think this is wrong. I think I can do better. In the article screenshots, he censored the cookie name, but thanks to the private showcase by Eslam, I was able to figure out more, because now I know the session cookie name is actually CI session, and a simple Google search reveals that this is the name for session cookies in Codeigniter. So now we know that the website is written in PHP using the Codeigniter framework. Big websites and services like Google, Twitter, Facebook, they run on mostly custom code, very complex logics, which means weird stuff might be implemented there. But generally, for basic websites like this target, I doubt there is anything really custom. It's too much work, especially when you already use a framework to handle a lot of it for you. And they use the popular PHP framework Codeigniter to implement their site. So I believe the answer what happened here lies in the way the framework is used, or more precisely a mistake developers could make when using this framework. So how do we figure that out? Well, usually authentication is implemented using a database. In PHP it's common to use SQL stuff, so I wanted to see how to do SQL queries in Codeigniter. I dug a bit into the Codeigniter documentation and looked at a few other example codes I found using GitHub, and that's when I learned about the query builder. Now I need a test setup to play around with this using a Docker image and Docker Compose file I found somewhere. I set up a basic example and copied stuff I needed from other random projects. Getting examples set up like this is super annoying, but eventually I had one where I can build SQL queries and even accept JSON requests. So here's the controller that takes a JSON request, prepares the where clause and passes it to the query builder with getWhere. As you can see, if we have wrong credentials, we get not found. But look closer here at the code. The code checks if user and password even exist in the JSON request. If not, where is going to be empty. So if we pass in any other JSON, it will actually succeed. We simply select the first user in the user table. And it turns out this JSON request in my test also worked on the target from Eslam. So I told him my result. If the where clause is empty, it matches everything and returns the first row. And ASD lol also returns one user because it's missing username and password. The where is empty, thus returning a row. And this is what I believe the code looks like on the backend. The programmers probably made a mistake with maybe some error checking code, checking whether username and password is properly set. And by passing in JSON data like this, the where query ended up being empty. This is super logical to me, and I can totally see how this can happen. Which means the title of Eslam's article is completely wrong and confusing. The authentication bypass didn't happen because of using root array. I knew from the start that this made no sense. I'm proud of my tingly feelers knowing that. Anyway, after I showed him my results that basically empty JSON works as well, he updated the article once again, extending the title with empty array, which is already better. But he even improved it even further on his personal blog, where the title is Authentication Bypass Using Empty Parameters. Also in there, he added that an empty JSON payload worked as well. And now I think we reached a pretty correct article. But I still think now that we know even more about it, it could be further improved. Here is how I would write an article. Authentication bypass in Codeigniter due to empty where clause, and then I'd explain that by removing username and password from the query, it caused the backend not to create a where clause, leading to an authentication bypass. This could be a somewhat common issue for websites developed with Codeigniter, so pay attention to that. And now we have a really valuable write-up because we now help pen testers in the future to understand that this could happen and they can test for it. Cool. But I have one more treat for you. This authentication bypass was not his only finding. Eslam didn't publicly list all the other issues they found on the client, but they showed me during our call. Turns out they also found a somewhat weird SQL injection issue. And by having seen one of those example SQL injection requests, I think I managed to identify another potential programming mistake in Codeigniter. Remember how we built this where clause from the JSON request? As a programmer, you might think you are super clever by simply passing the whole JSON request into the where clause. If we have a request like this, then the PHP array would look the same as if we assembled it by hand. Makes sense, right? So when you have minimal, beautiful and working code like this, the login still works. Try wrong credentials, you get not found. Try correct credentials, we log in. But see what happens if we modify one of the values here. Nothing happens. That is good because, of course, Codeigniter being a framework should take care of user-controlled input so it doesn't lead to SQL injection. But change the key here. You have an error in your SQL syntax. Turns out if an attacker controls this part of the where clause, in this case we control it because we just take the complete data from JSON, we get SQL injection. And this looked exactly like the SQL injections they found on the original target. Of course, this is not a general Codeigniter issue. Not every developer makes this mistake, but here on this side it happened. I'm pretty sure they wrote code similar to this. And if it happened there, I'm sure it can happen again. So we figured out a second potential issue for Codeigniter apps: accidental empty where clauses or straight up SQL injection. I'm really curious though, does anybody know if this is a known thing already? Is this something that is documented somewhere? At least in the official documentation, they don't seem to warn about it. They only warn about raw SQL. And even the builder where feature, they explicitly state all values passed to this method are escaped automatically. Which I guess is technically correct. The values are escaped, just not the keys. Anyway, if you know more about it, let me know. And if this is indeed something not really documented, then cool. We did valuable research that can help pen testers and bug hunters that encounter Codeigniter in the future. And to round out this video, let me play a short clip from the Day Zero podcast where they talked about this original article back when it was making its round on Twitter.
And to be fair, like, that's the situation you just get placed in sometimes as a researcher. Like, if you're researching a target that you don't have the source code to, and you just try something and it works, you just kind of have to be happy with that. You're not really going to know exactly why. And yeah, in this case, the researcher might not know because it could be a closed source target.
And I think this is such a cool example here because we did not have access to the source code, and yet I'm very, very confident that through this careful investigation, the reasoning and interpretation of the observed behavior, we figured out how the code probably looks like. And this is the power you get when you know how websites are developed. That's why pen testers and bug hunters should be comfortable around code. Recently, Stack Smashing and I started building a security online training website called HEXTREE.io. If you are a developer, a pen tester, or bug hunter, we hope you can learn from our hacking courses. We cover various topics from web security over reverse engineering and even hardware hacking. We are still in the early phases of development, so there's not much there yet, but maybe you can keep us in your mind and check out our offering in the future over at HEXTREE.io. And maybe leave a follow on our Twitter, HEXTREE.io, and join our Discord. Thanks for staying and watching the ad. See you soon.